Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Werner Krul. As you heard, I'm the person responsible, and I don't like that word so much, but I'm the person who drafted the bill. Obviously, ultimately, it's Parliament's bill, and the bill was signed by the President, which means it's now an act of Parliament. And I will take you through the various aspects. Please feel free to engage, to stop me and ask questions. Now, if I can just get this going. There we are. So the regulatory landscape is important to look at because obviously law doesn't operate in isolation. There's always a background, there's always an environment of which you need to be aware. Now, in this instance, we are looking at the National Rail Policy, which was started to be developed in 2017, and it was accepted and approved by Parliament, by Cabinet in 2022. Policy, obviously, is a governmental instrument. It's part of what the executive indicates it wants to do in a particular area. So in the policy itself, there's reference to the RSR simply because the RSR is such a vital component of rail regulation in South Africa. And that's why specifically it indicated that the RSR has a specific role to play, and it indicates what the mandate is. Now, it says that DOT shall align with the RSR, which indicates that there's a symbiotic relationship. The department is there because it's in charge of overall rail policy, all the other aspects, also, of course, other modes of transport, but specifically on rail transport, it has a particular role to play. It has a section that deals with rail. But then there's the RSR as well, which is a public entity, a separate institution which deals with a very specific area. And simply because one needs a certain level of expertise, which officials in a government department do not necessarily have. Obviously, they know about rail and etc., but there are very specific issues that need to be done. And the execution is then placed on a public entity, in this case, the RSR. So that's where we came from, the development of a national rail policy. The bill, at the moment, it's still with the department. It's still a bill. It's not law yet. But this bill is supposed to bed down the principles that we have in the policy. So the policy is a notice of intent. But the bill is then the instrument that's created in order to implement that policy. The main thing, I think, in terms of the RSR is there is a definite recognition in that bill of the role of the RSR, and it refers to our Act. So there's the link. The RSR is an integral part of rail regulation in this country. The National Rail Bill is a framework type of legislation. It's overarching. It tells us about the different aspects of rail regulation in South Africa, and that's why there's the recognition of the RSR. The bill itself doesn't go into detail because obviously we have the RSR Act, which does that. So there's no repetition, there's just the linkage. Now, the one aspect that you will find in the bill is the creation of the National Rail Planning Office. That is an office that some of the officials are already operating. They are going to put together a national rail master plan, and all of this is already reflected in the policy. This master plan will look at all the various aspects of rail regulation, so they will interact with the RSR from time to time. Because obviously there will be references, there will be aspects that are dealt with in the master plan that affect the RSR, or that the RSR will affect the plan. So there will be liaison, and it's made mandatory. So the planning office can't bypass the RSR or ignore it. They have a mandatory duty to consult, collaborate, and coordinate. So that is where we have that interface. But the bill, hopefully, we will see development this year. I hope that we can have the bill in Parliament in the second half of the year, and hopefully Parliament will expeditiously consider it and hopefully then also approve it. These are the various aspects that we need to look at. One of the other aspects, obviously, is also the Economic Regulation of Transport Act. You'll see it's also an act that was approved last year, and I'm not quite sure, I think it has come into operation yet. There was also an interim regulator that did not have statutory powers, but now it has. And the role of that institution is set out in that act. It aims to develop a competitive, efficient and viable South African transport sector, contributing to economic growth. In this debate around the budget now, you will have said, people have said, yes, the constraints on mobility need to be lifted. So this is all part of that effort to change things and get it going again. It will have a single economic framework. It will have an economic council as well. I think those of you who are familiar with the Competition Commission will know that there's also a competition tribunal. Now, this is sort of the same thing. We'll have the regulator, which will set standards and which will make determinations, much like the RSR does. But then there's a council as well, which will have a total oversight, etc. It will provide for price controls. Now, before we think of, okay, they're going to set prices, that's not necessarily the function. They will look at prices that are set by operators and players in the environment, and then make certain pronouncements so that you don't have the market that is dominated by one institution or that it abuses its power. So that will there. Now, in the RSR Act, you will see that there's a provision that says the RSR must liaise with any entity that has jurisdiction over safety issues within the transport section in order to harmonize the exercise of jurisdiction over transportation matters. So if this economic regulator starts doing things that impacts on what the RSR is doing, then you have the right, not only the right, the duty, it says must. You must then interact with that institution and resolve the issue or cooperate, collaborate, whatever the case may be. So that's what we are looking at. We're looking at National Rail Planning Office, which will be in the department. We're looking at the economic regulator, and then, of course, there's the RSR itself. So that basically is where we are at the moment. Now, we obviously did the consultation that was necessary for the bill, and then we submitted, or rather the minister tabled the bill in Parliament, which then meant it was Parliament's bill, and Parliament has the power to amend, to change, to take out, to whatever they want to do with it. And they then decided that over and above the consultation that we had done, which is mandatory, they also want to do consultation. So there's a big road show in all the provinces of the country. That is part of the reason why it took so long for us to have this act on the statute book. And so there was an extended consultation process there as well. Then the next issue we need to look at is safety versus security. Now, during this consultation phase that we had, the parliamentary consultation phase, Parliament went not to the capitals of the provinces, but to rural towns, etc. And a number of us went along and sat down in the town halls. And the most pressing issue there was security. Now, we asked them to indicate to the people present that there's a difference between safety and security, but nobody actually took note of that. And they talked about security. And they said, but you know, there's a crossing there and it's not guarded, so the children play there, and then there's a train coming past, or there's a train with manganese and all the dust settles in our village, etc. Now, all of those aspects obviously deal with security. Or they said, you know, we're standing on the station and we're waiting for the train to arrive, and then we are mugged, or even worse. Those are security issues. And we have a very special role in this particular instance to look at safety, not at security. So we have a definition of what is security. It means the freedom from intentional harm or damage to persons or property. That's the security aspect. That's the physical security aspect. And rail safety deals with how does rail operate? What are the conditions that are required to have rail operations that run smoothly, that don't cause problems? So one must always have that at the back of one's mind, that in this act we are dealing with safety, not with security. So there's a provision in the act itself which deals with security, simply because there was this confusion amongst the ordinary persons looking at the bill. And that is to say that in respect of a specific railway operation, the relevant operator is responsible. And you will recall that there were court cases involving PRASA, where commuters had been thrown off trains and all other things had happened. And the courts reinforced this principle, and they said the operator must ensure that there's physical security for the passengers. And so PRASA has taken certain steps to do that, and that is what we refer to there. And then we say security in general is the responsibility of the organs of state responsibility for security and law enforcement. And that's the South African Police Service. Obviously, they have a particular section that deals with railways and stations, and you will find police officers patrolling on the stations, etc. This is what we refer to here. So specific operations, the operator, in general, the law enforcement agencies. And that's, we refer to the, or have in mind the police service, but it might even include intelligence services or whoever. It obviously depends on the environment. Those people will know how to deal with that, the particular aspect. And then we say that operators and the organs of state for security must cooperate. So there are plans in place, frameworks, etc., which deal with this particular aspect. But that's a separate issue. That is not something that is focused on by the RSR itself. But it's just important for us to have that background, to bear that in mind. Now, before we go into the specifics of the legislation itself, but there's one very basic principle that I want to emphasize today. And the first part of the slide is a quote from a judgment, a court judgment, which talks about this. And what it says is, we are looking at natural persons or juristic persons, private persons, you and I, and we're looking at organs of state. Now, there's a difference in how the law applies to them, and we need to have that at the back of our minds when we interpret legislation. You and I, we are natural persons. We can do anything we want unless it's prohibited by law or regulated by law. Law says you cannot murder another person, so you don't have that freedom. But if that law hadn't been in place, you would be able to do that. We are private citizens. If we own a motor vehicle, we can operate it. But that operation is regulated. And the regulation says you must be older than, I think, 17, must have a valid driver's license, and there are certain rules that apply to operating a vehicle on a public road. But if you own a big property or you're on a farm or somewhere, you can drive any way you want because you have the freedom to do so. So people, natural persons, can do anything. They don't need somebody to give them permission to do it. We can do anything we want to unless it's regulated or prohibited. You will recall a few years ago they invented the drones, and a number of people bought drones and they started flying them all over the show. And initially they could do so without any restriction whatsoever because there were no regulations, and they had the freedom to do what they wanted to do. Then the regulation came in and they said, okay, you can fly drones, but only subject to certain rules, only certain places, only in a certain way, etc., etc. So that's an illustration of a natural person having freedom to do anything unless it's regulated. But an organ of state is absolutely the opposite. It can't do anything unless there's something that says you can or you must do this or that or the other. So an organ of state can't say, well, you know, I'm a railway safety regulator, I want to do this or that or the other. You can't do that. You need a permission to do that. And the Act is an instrument of permission. It's where Parliament says, this organ of state, the RSR, you may or you must do A, B, C, D, E, and that's these things that we will go through. I sometimes have this inquiry from ministers who say, well, you know, I'm responsible for this portfolio. I want to do this and that. And then I need to say, sir or madam, unless we have legislation that empowers you to do that, you can't just assume that you have the power. We need to have some kind of authority that tells us that this is what you can do or what you must do. And all of you will be familiar with the expression of unauthorized expenditure. The Auditor General very often flags that with institutions where they've spent money and there's no authorization. There's no power to do so. And that's why in this Act we say what are the powers in respect of finances that this particular organ of state can do. So when you look at the Act, always remember the cardinal role is you can only do those things for which you have express or by necessary implication the authority to do. You have no inherent, no original rights or powers or functions. You must always go back to the Act and other aspects that might be applicable, like the PFMA, the Public Audit Act, whatever, and that's your authority to do the things that you need to do. Now, I focus on the Act, but obviously there are other forms of legislation as well, the first being regulation or certain notices. But you will note that this Act, as you will find in other pieces of legislation as well, there's always a provision that says the minister may make regulations or issue notices, and that's the authority to do that. Otherwise, the minister couldn't do that. You will also see there's a definition in the RSR Act which says this Act means this Act and the regulations, so that there's no doubt about that this constitutes law and that is where your authority comes from or your regulation comes from. So this is extremely important to remember this. Always when you start with a new initiative, step back for a moment and say, where's my authority to do this? I mean, there are very often very good ideas about things, but unless it's mandated by Parliament via an Act of Parliament or mandated by a minister via regulations, you cannot do that. Are laws of general application, but they only apply the moment you get into a car and start driving. So it has general application, but it's limited because of certain facts on the ground. And the facts in that instance would be that I take a key and I put it in the ignition, and I switch on the car and I drive. Then that law applies. But I could, for instance, own a car and park it in my garage and never drive it. And then the traffic laws don't apply, simply because I never drive it. But because I have an inherent right to own a motor vehicle, I can do that. Now, obviously, it would be stupid, but you know, it's a possibility. But there's one other aspect, because you sometimes have people asking, especially when I do something like that, like I'm doing today, I tell them about things and they say, but where does it say that? Now, our law, obviously, statute law is the most important part of our law. But we also have common law, and we have law that applies in general, like, for instance, the rules of interpretation. There's no one specific law that lists all the rules of legislation or interpretation. They've been developed over centuries. We actually have some of those rules emanating from the Roman times. So there's a body of law over and above the Act that deals with certain things. Now, so sometimes the power is not expressly written down. And that's why we add or by necessary implication. In the RSR Act, for instance, we have a provision that says the CEO may appoint staff subject to certain things. But it doesn't say, well, the CEO can also fire or suspend staff. That is something that we say it's there by necessary implication. Because of the fact that you can appoint somebody, it also means as a development from that principle that you can also discipline that person, you can suspend that person, or in certain instances, obviously subject to labor law, fire that person. And that is not specifically written into the RSR Act, but it also applies, especially things like laws dealing with finances, PFMA, Public Audit Act, triple PFMA, or other law that applies. So those are the things that you need to look at. Labor law impacts on the RSR, it's binding on the RSR. VAT, you pay VAT on a number of things. So there are all of these other laws as well that are available to the RSR or place duties on the RSR. For instance, the VAT legislation says if you do certain things, you will pay VAT to SARS. You don't have a choice. So please bear in mind that whenever you start with a new initiative or new powers or whatever the case may be, you will always ask the officials, where's the authority? Show it to us, and then you can act and carry on. But this is really a very important thing, and as I say, it's not always understood by everyone. Now we've got the RSR Act at long last. We've looked at the environment, we've looked at some of the rules that apply. The new Act. Why a new Act? Why don't we use the current Act and just amend it? Now, that is obviously always a possibility. But you will note that when you compare the current Act and the new Act, that there's a difference in a number of instances. Not only as to the contents, but also how it's arranged and how it's grouped and the new aspects, etc. So at the time, the choice was made by the department, because we must bear in mind that legislation is administered by the department, and it's the minister's prerogative to approach Parliament to submit proposals on new legislation. So the decision was taken to draft a new Act simply because amending the current Act would have been too involved in terms of amending every little phrase, etc. You would have had a bill which would have been 80 pages instead of 35 or 30, whatever, how long our Act was at the end of it. So it was said it's also easier to understand because now you don't have various versions floating around. If, for instance, when you look, if you want to see the current RSR Act and you Google it, it first takes you to government's website. Now, government's website reflects legislation as it was adopted at the time. But then you go to the RSR website and it shows you the Act which was amended in the meantime. So even on government servers, you have two different versions. And that sometimes confuses people who are not au fait with the statutory landscape. So that is also one of the arguments that was taken into account. We have a clean break, we have a clean piece of legislation which will have a specific number and which will have a specific reference, and it's just easier to access, etc. So we started with a revision of the Act in 2015, or rather I shouldn't say we, the department did. I joined the process in 2017, and that was also, we were also part of the development of the new policy and of the other legislation that goes with this. So then we had the rail policy, which was formally adopted by Cabinet, which then became the official viewpoint of government in this regard. And then we started with analysis of what were the problems we had in the current Act, what were some new challenges that were not catered for in the current Act, etc. There was an inception report with some international benchmarking, and we went quite a way with that, not looking at the traditional benchmarking itself. We looked at Europe, but we also looked at Africa. We looked at the experiences in countries like Tanzania or Kenya, Morocco, which is a very progressive on rail, Egypt. We also looked at the BRICS countries. India specifically had very good examples, simply because it's a very rail-intensive country. Australia we looked at simply because the conditions in terms of the gauge that we were using, both of us were victims of the colonial times. Britain shipped its rubbish to the colonies, and it went on to standard gauge, and it gave us the small gauge. Australia has the same experience, so we looked at what they were doing, etc. So we did a lot of benchmarking to see that we were up to standard with whatever was working in the world. We had the draft approval, we had the departmental approval, the state law advisors, Cabinet was happy, and then we went to Parliament, parliamentary process. And remember, there are two processes in Parliament, because it's the National Assembly to start off with, and then the National Council of Provinces. And because of the fact that in the Constitution, transport is both a national competency as well as a provincial competency, we had to take a few extra steps. Some of you might be aware of this, but the National Parliament isn't the only law-giving body in this country. All the provinces also have their own parliaments, or rather legislative institutions, and they can also make certain laws which the Constitution lists in Schedule 4, and transport is one of them. So it's quite possible, in theory at least, that provinces can adopt their own legislation dealing with rail. And we actually have an example of this. Gauteng itself has a rail management institution. It has its own legislation that deals with that institution, sets out the mandate of that institution, deals with Gautrain, etc. So we already have a precedent in that regard. But so we needed to take that into account as well, and I'll refer you to that. So if you have a conflict between a national law and a provincial law, which deal with the same subject, such as transport,
right,
and they are in conflict, then there's a mechanism to overcome that particular position, and as I said, there's a mechanism. It will go through various stages, and then National Parliament will ultimately decide. But of course, fortunately in this country, we have a separation of powers. So even if Parliament decides, well, we like the National Act better than the Provincial Act, the province can then always approach our courts, the Constitutional Court, which has the mandate to look at constitutionality and issues that deal with the Constitution. So the Constitutional Court is the final arbiter, and will say, this legislation is invalid because it's in conflict with other legislation that will supersede. So we haven't had that situation yet in South Africa, but the mechanism is there. because internationally that has happened in some countries where you have the same sort of system as we have, Germany for instance, or Canada. You will find that the provincial governments take national government to court, to their constitutional courts. So it is possible, but we haven't had that yet. But because we are aware of the problem, I was one of the drafters of our constitution, so I know those issues very well. I've put a few things in our legislation to safeguard it as far as possible. And if you look at the words in the beginning of our legislation, I refer specifically for the need to have a uniform framework. And Parliament adopted that. And that's a very strong argument. So if ever we had to weigh up the RSR Act against provincial legislation, there's this very definite statement in our Act which says we need to be uniform in our approach. And in order not to get in a situation where you have different frameworks in different situations in different provinces, we've put that in. So that strengthens our position. So if we ever were to get to that position, we have some ammunition available to deal with that type of situation. So that is possible, yes. And then, importantly, we had the assent by the President. Now, you may be aware that once Parliament has adopted legislation, it's not an act yet. It needs the final signature of the President. Now, in practice, what happens is the legislation is sent to the Presidency, and the President has a team of people, legal people, who then go through it to check for constitutionality, etc., etc. And if they advise the President, and the President is happy, he will sign the legislation, and then it's still not an act of Parliament. It needs to be published. So you will have seen the notice from the Presidency which says this is the RSR Act in the schedule, and that's where you will find the RSR Act. And only if it's published, the moment it's published, it is an act of Parliament. So once the President has signed it and it's published, then we have an act of Parliament as we have now. Then we only need to look at the date of commencement and implementing the Act, because the Act itself lays down a number of functions, but also a number of duties for the RSR. And the Act is very explicit in what the duties and functions are. So we need to proceed to implementation as well. So we now have a new Act, and it's on the table. So what's new? From a contents point of view, it's largely unchanged. We didn't dismantle the RSR. We didn't chop and change and do things. The basic concepts are still there. There are a few new additions, but and we will go into those. And there are also specifics where we have changes and what we've done. We've also used clarity. You will know that we've changed in South Africa to plain English, not this King's English or whatever they call it. We use language that we understand. So it's drafted in plain English. And what we've attempted to do is in this bill to make it flexible, so that as things develop over time, that the law can cater for it. For instance, we don't know what new technologies are coming along, but the bill is crafted in such a way that you as the RSR can, to a very large degree, adapt to any new technology, new developments, new initiatives that need to be done. So it gives you greater flexibility in terms of how you can operate. Then there's a new section specifically on international cooperation, and that is to say that the Minister may request the RSR to implement an international agreement. And we are specifically looking, obviously, at things in our region, the SADC region, and maybe even beyond that. We might get a greater pan-African rail system or rail regulation, whatever the case may be. And if South Africa is party to such an international agreement, then there is room for it to be implemented. So the safety aspects of that agreement will then be for the RSR to implement. You will recall, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, the President in his State of the Nation speech said what he'd like to see is a train going from Cape Town to Cairo. Now, that's probably still somewhere in the future, but it's quite possible that we'll have more trains going all over the show and greater economic activity, etc. So this is designed to be available should that ever arise. Then the focus is on rail safety. It's not, the Act is no longer the Rail Safety Regulator Act. It's the Rail Safety Act. The issue of safety is the goal of this legislation. The regulator is the mechanism to achieve that. It's the means to an end. But the focus is on safety. Then we've narrowed the application in a very small way. It excludes certain cranes and things. Obviously, during consultation, that came up, and I'm not going to bore you with the details on that. Then the exemption provision has been extended, because coming back to the constitutional issue, we in this Act, or rather I say we, Parliament allows the Minister in certain instances to say that this portion of the Act or this particular regulation does not apply in this particular instance. And for that to be constitutional, we have to have a very transparent process to do that. Otherwise, if we didn't have that, the Minister could say, well, I exempt everybody from all the provisions of the RSR Act. And by doing that, he or she would then effectively shut down all rail safety. Now, we live in a country with constitutional supremacy. That can never be. A minister should never be able to say, this Act doesn't apply to all. That is Parliament's job. If Parliament thinks this is a bad Act, they can repeal it. That is the power and the role of Parliament, not that of a minister. So we've now tried, as far as possible, to make this exemption clause constitutional and foolproof. So that if somebody says, well, you shouldn't have exempted that person, we've got a system to check whether it was done correctly or not. And if it's done correctly, then the minister has that power. Now, you can read that section. It sets out what the process is. And again, we're looking at transparency, so that everything happens because of the correct reasons and there's not anything else involved. So this exemption clause, you will see, differs from the one that is currently in the Act. Then, very importantly, Section 5. The RSR continues as it was before. It's still the same organ of state. There's no interruption in its legal personality. I know this is very technical, but it's a very crucial and important point. So it's explicitly said in the Act that the RSR continues as before. It's the same person. Then also, if you look at Section 69, 69 is the section that deals with transitional issues. And that is going from the old Act into the new Act. And there are a number of sub-sections there that deals with this particular principle. There's no interruption in respect of cooperative agreements. So all agreements you have currently will just carry on once the new Act comes into force. There's no interruption. The employment of staff, the staff are employed on the same basis, same salary, same duties, same functions. None of that changes. And also important why we put that in from an income tax point of view. The moment you change employers, there's an impact on your personal income tax. So that's why we said very clearly here there's no interruption, so that those particular negative aspects don't come bearing down on the RSR staff. So all of that just clears. Then it deals with the appointment of the current board It says that the board continues. The fact that there's a new act doesn't interrupt your terms of office, and we'll get into that later. Then the rights, the duties, the liabilities, any litigation. I don't know whether you are involved in litigation at the moment. All of that just continues. If there are any permits issued, the fees, the penalties, all of that carries on as if we didn't have a new act into being. And that obviously was put into to ensure that we have a smooth transition, smooth operations, that it's not reinventing the wheel. So we took care of that. Then board of directors, the board itself. What's the difference? And you will see if you look at the current act and the new act that the new act is actually has a few more provisions. And one of the reasons for that was that the Department of Public Service and Administration, the DPSA, published a document which was sent to Cabinet and which set out how should we function public entities in general, the boards. Because you will remember that certain boards of certain organs of state did things that they shouldn't be doing, and there were certain ministers who didn't get along with their boards and who then just sacked the whole board, and all kinds of other things. Let's not go into detail. So DPSA said that from now on, when there's a new board, we need to have these principles in place. And you will see that reflected. So we focused on those particular aspects, and Cabinet was happy with it, and Parliament was happy with it. So we have very specific rules. But at the same time, coming back to the principle of flexibility, you will find that where possible, we have left things in the discretion of the board. We did not prescribe that you must meet every 2 months, or you must meet in Midrand, or that's for the board to decide. You have a chairperson, you have a deputy chairperson, you have members with certain rights and duties and functions. Apart from those things, the board is free to regulate itself, because ultimately we are focusing on the outcome. How does the board perform? The board has certain functions. Does it fulfill those functions? It has certain duties. Has it complied with those duties? So we are shifting the focus from prescribing to what happens at the end. Did we have rail safety? Because that's one of the functions of the board, is to oversee the operations of the RSR. And that is why you are entrusted with this very important function, to look at what is done by the RSR. But we'll get into the detail of that at a later stage. Sorry. So, as I said, the concepts are largely unchanged. We still have the safety permits, but new in Chapter 4, the safety critical grades. And the people around the table who went with us to Parliament will remember that this was a very interesting debate, because many people didn't like this. They said, well, you know, we've been doing it this way for all the years, so why now? And the minister was very adamant and said, but we do have a problem. We have all these incidents, and we have loss of life, not only of the people who operate the trains, but also pedestrians or passengers, etc. So we need to know that if somebody is in charge of a locomotive, that they are properly trained and they meet certain standards. And also because we have a different situation with rail traffic, we'll have trains coming from Zimbabwe or Botswana or Namibia or one of our neighboring countries, and our trains will increasingly, hopefully, go there. And then we need to know that the trains that come in from other countries, that the people who operate those will be, first of all au fait with the rules that apply in our country, will understand our signaling systems, that the trains themselves will meet the standards that we set. So it was important. So there's a chapter that deals with this, standards of safety, and the management system remain as is. We did not interfere with those. The safety information monitoring system is there. The enforcement section has been beefed up. The inspectors, and we'll get to that at a later stage, now have vastly extended powers, because people always say, yeah, we've got all these organs of state, but you know, they bark a lot, but they never bite. And to a certain degree, that may have been appropriate to say that. But we wanted the RSR to be in a position to effectively do its job. And it needs certain powers. Obviously, if you have certain powers, you also have certain obligations and certain responsibilities. Those always go hand in hand, but we'll deal with that at a later stage. Then the occurrence reporting, that has changed as well in terms of the dynamics that are involved, simply because there's such a vast array of incidents that happen. Then the system of appeals has been amended slightly. We now also involve the tribunal, the Transport Appeals Tribunal, and there's a little more clarity in that regard. Way. Chair, on the staff, terms and conditions, the organogram, all those things will be determined by the board and implemented by the CEO. But the CEO implements staff. So if the CEO thinks that person X is the correct person for that position, as a board, you accept that if the person meets the requirements. It's not the board's function to appoint individual staff members. But a wise CEO will obviously consult with the board, especially for the senior positions, saying, I think I want to appoint this person as CFO or COO. What are your feelings, that kind of thing. So it's an organic type of situation, but it is the CEO who appoints. The Minister and the Minister of Finance approve the annual remuneration. Again, an informal nudge in the direction of the department to attend to this matter in a timeous way is important. Financial. Okay, the funds of the RSR more or less the same as they used to be. Bank accounts, board may invest excess, and there's an interesting point there because PFMA, yes, we hope there's an excess. There's an interesting point there because the PFMA says that if you have excess funds, you must give it back to the Treasury. So now there's this provision, and if that situation arises, one can look into what the details are. Financial year starts the 1st of April. That's the same as it was. So there's not much change there, except for one exception, and that is when there are penalties levied by the RSR. The money doesn't come into the coffers of the RSR, it goes to the National Revenue Fund. And the reason for that is many people complain, yes, we get penalties simply because the RSR wants to make money. And to remove that argument, the money now doesn't come to the RSR, goes to the National Revenue Fund, the overall government bank account, if we can call it that. And it removes that argument that the RSR is giving penalties for the documents. If there's a problem with any document, for instance, you issue a safety permit, but then you realize there's a mistake made on it, then there are ways to rectify it. But a document is valid if it's issued, but there are ways of dealing with it. You can withdraw the document if, for instance, a safety permit was issued because somebody paid money under the table. Then you withdraw it. Then it's not a valid, although it says it's valid until 2028, you withdraw it, it's not valid anymore. And then the reporting annually by 31st of August. You must submit a report to the Minister on the performance of the RSR and the impact of railway operations on the safety of employees, the public and the environment associated with railway operations. I think this is a fairly standard exercise. You need to do that. And then there's other reporting, your audit reports and your annual reports, etc. all of that stays the same.